Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar. I'd like to give you an introduction to this ESD webinar series called Funding Avenues. This is a brand new webinar series that ESD Empire State Development will be organizing and featuring various panelists and industry specialists on the various opportunities game developers have either historically or currently looking towards funding their games and interactive products. And this will be our overall webinar series overview. So this will be a general casual overlook of what these avenues look like, giving you a top level highlight of takeaways, and then we'll go into introducing each of their case studies, featuring more panelists of their topics and developers who have success stories using this opportunity. This will be live on Zoom, and unfortunately for this one will not be on Twitch. And moving forward, they will be available as videos on demand on the YouTube channel that ESD hosts. That link will be blasted off to everyone who joins, and also our newsletter. So I'd like to first introduce myself. My name is Ami Tai. I work as the project manager for digital games at Empire State Development. I am here to be a representative of all of New York State's games industry and support everyone getting them resources and allocations for how New York State level at Empire State can help them and to promote the programmings that we have. Thank you so much for joining. I will now be bringing in the panelists who will introduce themselves. Let's see if the tech agrees. Here we go.
Hey, hi, Ami. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Ami, for organizing this really informational webinar. I guess, and so to start, I'm Vicky. I am the head of finance at Akupara Games. Akupara is an indie games publisher. And so what I do is I oversee external and internal funding, which basically means I handle the allocation of money to developers, but also internally within the team as the publishing team itself. But here I'm going to talk about the external funding. So Akupara is what we call a full service publisher. So we fund like capital. So developers can eat and put a roof over their head while they are making their games. But we also do labor allocation, which is the full service part, in addition to the funding, where we handle what I call the admin development, which I think we can go into later, which is a lot of the localization and QA and the store management. And then the other side of it is that we do business development. And we also, I think this is a big one that a lot of developers ask for, is we provide marketing service. And that's like the entire slate of a marketing campaign, from signing to launch and post-launch. So I guess that also covered, so this is how we support developers financially. And then I think one thing that we went over, since this is the funding discussion, of like the timelines of when to apply to Akupara. Okay, so my insanely cheeky response is right after a hit launch, about a month after, because that's when we're getting paid. But really, you can apply at any time. And that's because we games will delay up suddenly, that we might be moving a game in November, and we actually have a slot opening up for a launch in November, which I understand is a very short timeline to launch. So that's what I mean by any time is actually a good time as well.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Okay, I will be bringing in as well. Brian, if it tech agrees.
Hey, am I on? Okay. What's up? I'm Brian Chung. I'm one of the directors at Game Devs of Color, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, gamedevsofcolor.org. And what we do, Game Devs of Color is a nonprofit whose mission is to amplify the creative power held by people of color in games. So one of the things we're known for is our flagship annual online conference, Game Devs of Color Expo, coming up September 16 through 19. But we also do game showcases with global audience, reaching hundreds of thousands of visitors. We run scholarship programs in multiple cities and other opportunities like no strings development grants, which is what we'll mainly be talking about today. So how our approach to supporting game developers financially is that we're mission driven, and that's in everything we do. So we don't charge developer fees. We always pay speakers. Our tickets are sliding scale. We prioritize online accessibilities, all without putting costs on developers. So we can even get your Steam fee waived. All of this is to say that we're developer first by philosophy. And for that reason, the grants that we do are no strings. And yeah, that's the biggest way we support devs financially. We've awarded grants ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 to small teams and individuals. It's no strings, so there's no recoup, there's no approvals, no milestone dependencies, and we award them annually every September during our conference. So the general timelines of when developers typically apply to our opportunities. For the no strings development grants, people apply for our grants when they are beginning to have something to show to the public. So while we think of it as investing in the creator, we do want to know what game it's going to be going towards and what kind of potential impacts there could be by helping fund this. So it also helps to have some track record, previous game, or just the current traction that the current game has. Because there are hundreds of applications and only a few grant recipients annually. So we don't take any early pitches or slide decks or early prototypes. It just helps to have a track record there, given the sort of the stage that we, the stage of project that we give funding to, and sort of our past results, the best practices of best results from those investments. So that's there's a lot to share about that. That's the Game Devs of Color grant. I just want to take a moment here to also mention some of the other grants that are available along similar lines. You should look out for ones from Latinx and Gaming, from Wings, from Dracneck. They have a New Voices. It's for puzzle designers, a grant for that. And there's a grant for that's active right now from Gay Gaming Professionals. And yeah, and you can look up our set Game Devs of Color.
Thanks so much, Brian. Okay. Bring in Asia.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Asia Prieto. I'm the games coordinator at Kickstarter. Essentially, what Kickstarter is a crowdfunding company where we help folks bring creative visions to life. Kind of a key difference that kind of separates us from something like a GoFundMe is that, you know, Kickstarter, it's specifically to fund a creative project versus like funding a cause or something like that. Essentially, how do we support, you know, game developers financially? You can run a crowdfunding project on our site to raise money for, you know, to fund your video game. one of Kickstarter's main big advantages as far as being a crowdfunding, platform is that we do have a built-in audience, dedicated audience of people that are anticipating, different types of games launching and wanting to support that and whatnot. I will say though that a key thing that's very important for Kickstarter is to kind of, gain your own traction before coming onto the platform to run your campaign. But there's a wide use of, besides just, funding your campaign. I've worked with video game projects that have, been able to use their Kickstarter as a, kind of launch point to show to publishers, hey, there is interest here. And the same thing with VC funding as well. So there's a wide use for Kickstarter in general. It can be used for marketing, it can be used for just funding the game in general. But that's kind of, how best to be used, how it can best be used by developers. As far as when to run a campaign or the best time to, launch a campaign on Kickstarter, it ranges. I've worked with campaigns that have primarily used Kickstarter just to raise money to, have a band do their music for them, or just, have someone do their music for them. I've also worked with campaigns that are coming off of like, a dev studio that has had large IPs and have worked on larger games. And so they're, kind of like working with that and don't necessarily have a demo or anything fully presented, like, something that they can present essentially. And they're raising to get, a demo made or like the full game made. Often what I see typically as far as like a high ratio correlated to success is when a campaign has already had their demo out. They've been at PAX East, Steam Next Fest, not all of those specifically, but have done stuff similar. And they're looking to go and run on Kickstarter to fund the full game. And just kind of get like the early access ready essentially. So there's a wide range there. The big thing I think is just like coming to Kickstarter and having momentum and general awareness kind of built up in order to succeed on the platform. We like to say that Kickstarter is fuel to a fire, not a fire starter. So it's best to come with your own fire, then we can pour the fuel on top with our built-in audiences and all different types of things that we can offer and whatnot.
Thanks so much, Asia. All right, let's see if we can get Jake added in. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Jake Weidner. I'm the industry liaison at the NYU Game Center, and I'm speaking on behalf of our incubator team. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the incubator. We're based out of the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, and the NYU Game Center Incubator is designed to support early stage game developers, not just our students, it's any local devs, by setting them up for success while they're trying to launch a game. So our opportunity is focused on like very early stage, either new teams or new companies that are trying to found. And for each team, we provide initial $15K in project funding and an executive producer that's paid by our incubator and recruited out of our industry advisory board. We also host throughout the year workshops from other members of the board and provide showcase opportunities such as GDC and other conferences like Play NYC and some other options we're looking at. And just this past year, we also did a Steam sale and a live broadcast of all the incubator games arranged around that. Alongside of all those opportunities, you get lots of deep feedback from lots of professionals in the industry, including our faculty, our alumni, and people that are signed up specifically to support the incubator. All of our efforts are designed to help teams prepare their games for successful publishing pitches, self-publishing efforts, crowdfunding, or studio formation. Basically, if you have a plan to commercialize a game, whatever that next step is, we're here to help you like professionalize and achieve that. The best time to apply to our incubator is ideally after like a full prototype or a really strong vertical slice, but before you'd be ready with like a full pitch demo that's kind of typical for the current publisher landscape. The main things that we're looking for are something that's playable and knowing that you have a clear plan for your commercial release that you can at least outline to us, and it helps if you know what your target audience is for all that.
Thanks so much. All right, and then that was covering all of our wonderful panelists regarding the publishing, the grants, crowdfunding, incubators, and unfortunately for our fifth panelist, we weren't able to have them on this call, but in the future, once we have our case study regarding investors and venture capital, we'll be able to dive more deeply in as long as you hear and subscribe to the pinging of our MailChimps regarding webinars, you'll be able to hear more. As a reminder, this will be the overview webinar, so there will be no Q&A from the attendants regarding any specific questions. Please save them for the case study calls and webinars where we can dive specifics into all these different opportunities and have various voices for you to hear more from. And also, can never say enough, thank you all so much for our panelists for taking time out of their day to answer some of our highlight questions developers can take the opportunity to learn more of. So to kind of to jump into questions, I'd like to start off to you, Vicky, in regards to publishing. Publishings have been, like publishers in general, have been a long part of the funding ecosystem in the games industry. How would you describe the current publishing landscape and particularly the rise of indie-focused publishers and essentially that overview?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in the publishing landscape, it's definitely more diverse. There are a lot more publishers now, and so like we've all begun to focus on various niches, and that niche can include genres, like it's almost like game length, but also like funding thresholds as well. I will say Akupara is we are genre agnostic, but I mean in practice, also I'm very sorry, there's grass cutting outside, it's very loud. But we are genre agnostic, but like typically if you look at our website and the games, like you can see that we haven't published a visual novel in a while, we haven't done a puzzle game in a while, we've done one tactics game, so you can see it. So part of like, you know, when you look at a publisher, you actually want to like look at the games they've published, and you're gonna see a slate of like side-scroller Metroidvanias. And that stems from just like the genres the leadership team likes. This is like me, Buddy, Alyssa, and David just happen to really like Metroidvania games, so we end up signing up quite a few of them, like Rainworld and Grime. We've got Gigasword, and we've got Echo Weaver coming out, so there's like 4 of them on our docket. We also have a couple deck builders because David and Buddy just really like deck builders, and then like we have one automation game just because one person just is on the leadership team is hyper passionate about it. So it is like, yeah, we are like a little bit niche as well. And if you look at other publishers, you can also see they're kind of establishing a niche. There's also like thresholds. For example, Akupara is we're a smaller funding threshold, so our overall package that includes the services and the capital allocation comes out to roughly about 400 and 500,000 in funding, but the actual capital funding we have not gone over 250,000 a year, and that is our threshold. I'm slowly eking it up a little bit as we grow, but I just if you are looking for $500,000 for your game in 1 year, I can tell you now we can't do it. Our risk allocation for a single game. There are publishers who will fund, indie publishers who will fund $500,000 though. Let's see. Okay. I think another thing with, you know, how the ecosystem has changed is that I think actually maybe this has always been the same, but we have a very strong focus on visual narrative, and there are some publishers who are like very gameplay focused, but you can like see on our games there's always generally a very striking art style as well. And I think another aspect of how the current publishing landscape operates, and this is especially with us, is that we encourage developers to actually like have sought other funding resources. We're not just like, you can only work with us. It's fine if you want to leverage the tax credits from New York State. And like, we try to tell our New York developers about state programs or their country specific programs. If you know about them, like if you are really early on and like definitely apply to the NYU incubator. I think there's also incubators with RIT and RPI as well. We've signed games after Kickstarters, and like, because that, you know, that is also your full funding package for you yourself as a developer. We also actually handle the backer rewards as well. If you have Kickstarter funding and you come sign with us, like, well, that's part of what we'll do. Also like work with game devs of color for funding. And I think, so this all comes to like, publishing is as much like a co-partnership between the developer and the publisher as well. It's not just like the publisher fully takes over. We in particularly love like having a back and forth with developers. And I think one thing we have noticed is that, especially with the marketing, is that with the games see more success when there are developers who are really active participants in having a voice in the marketing campaign. Like, for example, if you really, really want to be in the Game Devs of Color showcase, we do partner with Game Devs of Color, actually. So, but you know, just bring that up. If you want to be in, if you really want to participate in PAX East, just let us know. Like, we're like happy to do that partnership. Let's see. I think one thing that has also, another thing that has also changed is I do understand this can be a difficult thing, is that like a lot of publishing, from what I have seen, and sometimes like our team ends up like wanting this, and I have to push back on this, is that publishers, we sometimes even ask for more and more completed from the game, like that, as Jake mentioned, that full demo. We will fund on prototype, but it is rarer. And in a conversation I do often have internally, it's like, is the understanding of like how much of the game is complete versus the demo. So you don't need this, like, we don't always ask for like a fully commercial ready demo, because there are certain genres of games where like it is kind of difficult to have the commercial ready demo without also having had a baseline design of the entire game. And at that point, you're coming to us and like most of the game is finished. So I know, I understand that has changed a lot, and that can be very demanding, and it's something we're working on, of like how much is complete. So with that said, we also take, I don't know if people know this, but we also take multiple like stages of pitches. So if we say like on your first or second pitch, even, you know, it's like we're not ready yet, it's not necessarily because of the game, it's sometimes because our slate is full and we just don't have room in the timeline. And then but if if things change on your end and you come back as well, or we've said like the game's not there and we're not interested, we have signed games later after a second or even third pitch. Pretty flexible. But yeah, so I think those are a few of the ways it's changed, and like especially in the indie space.
Yeah, thank you so much for going into it. I know that it's also very interesting because the games industry is just so rampantly fast at evolving and changing and adjusting. So it is really helpful to always just like get a check-in, an overall check-in again of like, what is this landscape for publishing? Just because indie publishing, like your all's team, it like wasn't around like that long ago. This was a new development as well. And as these industry members are becoming more like solidified in the space, there's also just major adjustment in regards to what we all know about one another. So that's also really amazing to hear more. And thank you so much for going over it. I'd love to.
Sorry, I was say everything is a moving target. It's just like in terms of like funding allocation, it is a moving target for me, which is fine. That's just the nature of things.
Mhm. And it also probably helps if like depending on your games, like the publisher's availability, if a game takes up too much of their team's time, then maybe their intake is a little bit adjusted to it as well. So it's also just very important to be aware that, especially amongst indie publishers, they are still indie at the end of the day. That's what makes them different from the larger giant label publishing spaces. So yeah, no, thank you so much for going into it. I will then kick off another question to Asia. Given Kickstarter's cross-industry scope, how have game campaigns performed compared to other types of products?
Oh yeah, great question. So Kickstarter kind of serves a large audience. We have, categories such as publishing, comics, art, all that design and tech. And kind of what's kind of like our bread and butter essentially is design and tech and games are the highest performing categories on the site, monetarily. I do want to add the caveat though that whenever I say games, it is pretty specifically towards tabletop games. That's kind of for a long time been our kind of bread and butter whenever it comes to games. There has been a kind of steady rise in video games as far as like performance wise. So kind of our peak for video games was from 2012 to 2015, with the peak being 2013, where $48 million was raised towards successful video game campaigns. There was a pretty steep drop after that for the next 5 to 6 years, I think, for kind of a multitude of different reasons. I think just like, changes obviously in the industry, kind of like an opening up of funding and stuff, and VC funding and stuff like that. And then I think also too, kind of towards, something more Kickstarter specific, is that during that kind of like heyday, there were a lot of huge campaigns that I believe kind of overpromised and under delivered. So I think there might have been like kind of a sense of backers a little bit being burned. So kind of for those next 5 years after 2015, there was a pretty steep drop off. Last year, however, in 2024, we kind of saw our peak again, which was our highest raise since 2015, with a raise of $26 million going towards successful video games funding on the platform. So I think, the steady rise there is, again, multiple factors influencing it. Of course, like big changes in the industry and a lot of that VC funding now drying up. And then as well as kind of a cultural kind of understanding that like video games take a lot of time, labor, and effort to kind of make. And I think kind of that culture understanding, not just extending, not just being familiar with developers, but like also to people who support games and play games and back games and stuff like that. So I think the pandemic kind of made people kind of understand like, oh, it takes time and resources and logistics to make something come to life. And that is just something that is par for the course. So I think that's kind of influenced seeing that rise. And I'm kind of curious to see the next couple of years, or we're hoping to kind of continue to see that rise. And I'm noticing a lot more projects and stuff launch on the site. So I think some key differences as well to kind of speak to that of like, how does a video game on the platform kind of compare to a tabletop game or like even a design and tech thing. I think the biggest thing, and kind of something I don't want to say Kickstarter is moving away from, but something that we're kind of trying to create more space with, something as like along the lines of like our product rollouts and stuff like that, is like when you're backing a design and tech project, you're, very much backing to get a physical item in the mail, right? And so, you're backing to get a 3D printer or a new type of spatula or kind of whatever is happening in design and tech. The same thing can also be said for tabletop games as well. You're getting that physical item, where for video games, you're primarily, going to get a digital like Steam key, digital art book, music, soundtrack, something, something like along the lines of that. And then also to like, and then also not to say as well, like video games also, I've worked with a lot of different video game creators who have successfully had that physical piece of like merchandise come along with their game as well, or who have had like, console games or retro games that have been sent out. So like there is still a market there for that. But in general, we try to advise, especially first-time creators or first-time developers that are new to crowdfunding, to just stick to digital, because if you're not familiar with fulfillment or haven't worked in fulfillment, it can be a bit of a nightmare sometimes. Especially in light of all the things that are kind of going on as far as like shipping and getting things to people in general. But I think that's a kind of a key difference, is like there is that kind of digital heavy focus with video games, which is very, very different for all different types, which is very different compared to things like publishing, things like comics, especially things like tabletop games. And then of course too, there is also like a big difference of like a lot of times with, let's say, a tabletop game runs on the platform and has like a runaway success, typically those folks are not necessarily trying to become full-time game creators, right? So they're kind of like having this runaway success, and then they get to become full-time, tabletop creators, RPG creators, what have you. A lot of video game creators are kind of running a Kickstarter campaign, to fund the game, to do X, Y, and Z, but to also really fund their time and labor, because it's just very difficult to, roll out a game within a timeline that continues to keep backers or potential players interested. A lot of times that does require just full-time dedication. So that's another thing that I think is very different between a design and tech project, a tabletop project. Video games also kind of have built into their funding like a plan of like, hey, if we raise this amount, you're also funding me to like be able to afford my rent and foods while I like work full time on this game. So I would say that's pretty a key difference as far as like industry is concerned, for how video games compare to, different types of genres and stuff like that on the platform.
Yeah, no, that's super informative, just because it is like your platform is covering so many industries and has so many campaigns even started on a daily basis. So it's really great to know what are those like key experiences that digital games has been having. And I think, as you mentioned, especially since the pandemic, you guys have also been starting a lot more of these, I guess would be referred to as like virtual marketing monthly programs. Have you found any success stories regarding any of your various multiple monthly programs?
Oh yeah, I can speak to that as well. So like we like to call them open calls essentially. And we have like different open calls throughout the year. I would say two kind of big ones that happen are Witch Starter and Heartstrings and Hardbacks. Witch Starter takes place in October and is for any type of like witchy type of game. And I like to kind of, point to like Kickstarter, I think lags just slightly behind, but in general is up to the trend of like games that are very popular within like the cultural, like, attention span, like, horror games or things that are being, streamed pretty frequently. Like that tends to also be popular with Kickstarter. For example, I don't think this ran during Witch Starter, but there was a horror game that launched, I think, a year and a half ago called Macabre, that launched similar to around the time that Phasmophobia was very popular. And they raised, I think, over $300,000 on the platform. And so that would have been a great kind of campaign to run during Witch Starter. But again, open calls are kind of tough. They're kind of have traditionally been like geared towards more tabletop because it's a little bit easier to time, but we would love to see more, video games participate. And like as horror games continue to be really popular with, among streamers, influencers, and just gamers in general, like Kickstarter kind of rides that wave, and we kind of see that happening right now. In July, we currently have a open call called Heartstrings and Hardbacks. It was typically more geared towards romance novels and publishing, but we kind of changed the language to be a lot more inclusive for visual novels. And we've seen some really great success for visual novels on the site. Just for transparency, visual novels are really interesting because we have like really huge runaway successes like Touchstar that raised over $800,000, I think, a year or two ago. And then there are kind of like some that are like, kind of seeking out that like 20 to 50K range and just kind of like really kind of struggle or like kind of have middling kind of success throughout their entire campaign, either fund or don't fund. And I think, again, that speaks to what I was saying about like, I think visual novels are definitely very popular, but they're maybe not as streamable, maybe. And I think for me, speaking personally, like it's not something I see streamed a lot for streamers that I follow or stuff like that. But Kickstarter is trying to make it, more of a place where, with this open call where like visual novels can kind of like succeed and kind of have like, be added to this curated collection, which is another part of, our open calls and stuff like that. So that's just kind of some general trends that I've noticed. And of course, as everyone knows, cozy games are very, very popular. We don't have a specific open call for that, but like as cozy games have like, launched in popularity, like, there are just streamers that only do cozy games, YouTubers that just do cozy games or review cozy games. We've definitely seen that same type of success happen on the platform for sure. And I see a lot too, like as compared to visual novels that can sometimes kind of flounder a little bit with raising their funding, there are cozy games that are like seeking 20 to 30K that like kind of raise it. I don't want to necessarily say easily because I know there's a lot of time and labor that goes towards that, but like can definitely like get that audience wherever they kind of gain it and get them onto Kickstarter and kind of raise that. And there's also been runaway successes. A recent one was Monster Patch by Sean Young that raised a little over $400,000. I think that ran a couple of months ago. And that just kind of like, again, hit the wave of like cozy games. I think it'd be cool to have an open call around those, but we don't currently. But those are kind of just some general sort of like trends that I'm seeing like on the site and like things that Kickstarter does, i.e. our open calls that kind of like can be calling cards for certain types of creators and kind of help ride that wave of things that you're seeing that are trendy, outside of Kickstarter, just in the gaming, public attention in general.
That's awesome to hear, especially just because those two seem pretty prevalent in regards to marketing two very well-known game genres like the horror games and the visual novels. So that's really awesome that Kickstarter has been hosting a lot of these campaigns to support, the developers in getting them relevant of whatever Kickstarter is promoting, but then also to the customers is clearly, as you mentioned, is a big part of these campaigns is the relationship between these backers and what their relationship to these types of campaigns. So it's really awesome that you guys are doing so much of these almost like relationship buildings amongst these two forces. I will now go ask Jake a question in regards to NYU Game Center launching the incubator in 2014. And if you would like to highlight any of your recent cohort selections, is there any significant reasons regarding your program adopting an incubator model instead of an accelerator? And can you speak on those differences?
Sure, yeah. I don't know if we've announced our latest cohort yet. We did just wrap the previous one. But the reason why our program is an incubator, I guess to first kind of illustrate the difference, one of my colleagues remind me like the words do a lot of the telling, like incubators just as an object is a thing. It's like for growth, safety, warmth, providing the opportunity to grow something that's brand new. Accelerators, that's something that's already moving, make it move faster. Kind of that go fast, break things ethos, or really like get up to launch velocity. So that's kind of the themes of each. And then for us, we found that the incubator model fits really well in a university setting, especially at the Game Center, which is a department of design. So we're based already out of an environment of ideation, of experimentation, iterative growth. Our program is designed, or the incubator program is designed specifically for first-time commercial projects, not growth stage startups. So we're really trying to focus our support specifically on that critical first step of developers taking their projects to that commercial aspiration by giving them the resources they need with that funding to make it a priority in their lives. Most of our devs are like starting kind of working part-time or coming out of school or like have another initial job, but over the course of the time, the incubator is starting to make the project more of a focus. And then with the executive producers and the board and everyone in our building, like having the guidance to effectively prepare for that next stage of the range that I mentioned previously. Historically, choosing it as an incubator program, we did start in 2014 with 9 of our NYU MFA students. So it was kind of a natural growth of some ambitious thesis projects that wanted to go to launch. And then we were able to expand the program with New York State's Center of Excellence funding, which allowed us to extend the support to local devs too, and then just kept building on that core capability for early stage devs specifically. And I know that funding, the Center of Excellence, has also spun up similar efforts that were mentioned at RIT and RPI. And then there's similar kinds of incubation and training connection opportunities that are a little different at the CUNY colleges. So I think it's very natural to see these sort of things start up around universities, even though it's not exclusive to them. So yeah, the incubation model that we follow is great for local indies and student grads that want to turn their passion into a career. And then I know that our faculty and staff and the advisory board are all like have a shared interest and are particularly excited about really unique games and helping them come into their own. So that's why we've applied our focus on incubation.
And it also seems like, especially as you're highlighting with incubators, that just almost like the facilitation and guidance during that growing soft forms phase is really valuable, because then that guidance is what essentially seems like to differentiate between all the various incubators, whether amongst our COEs or just anywhere virtually available. It seems like that advisory element is kind of the flavor differences of why folks either start one or to, apply to one. Would you say that would be pretty accurate?
Yeah, I think like it's one of the things that's core for a lot of incubators is being like a longer timeline as opposed to an accelerator. Ours is a year. I think that like advisory focus as opposed to being as like nailed in on specific growth targets and plans in exchange for some equity that's typical at an accelerator creates like a lower pressure environment. Right now, we've had a small revenue split, and we're aiming to transition to like in-kind donation and support and like contribution to the program rather than just revenue. Yeah, overall, it's like a focus on that experimentation, like knowing that you have something special to start with, but then being in an environment where you can keep testing it, find the audience by taking it to a bunch of different shows, and working in a community of other people too. Like that's one of the biggest benefits I think is being situated in a cohort of other teams that are maybe have some shared values, but like radically different genre ideas, and being able to play off of each other and get really unique feedback, and then talk to each other about your skill development and career growth too.
Yeah, thank you so much for going into it. I will finally come back around to Brian, and I'd like to ask, for Game Devs of Color Expo, since it's so known for its strong virtual conference, direct, and an accompanied Steam sale, on top of all of your programming, also making the Made in New York grant, how do these grant kind of scholarship programs you guys have been organizing and hosting pair with your other programs? Do they all benefit from one another, or do they kind of act separately?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a mix, but most of them do work together. So I'll briefly explain our scholarships first, and then the grants. So with our scholarships, we organize cohorts of inspiring and up-and-coming professionals to meet for in-person opportunities in San Francisco, New York, and in Europe. And this sometimes includes microgrants to support their travel or any other expenses for that, for whatever reasons they're going to these gatherings. So in a lot of cases, it's showing their games or trying to make connections or pitching to publishers or to other parties. So we do those year round, and those applications are sort of separate. We open them ahead of large in-person industry gatherings like GDC, Games for Change, Gamescom. And so that's one way to get small support and small funding from us, but also the support of the connection and the mentorship from that program. The grants that we do are a little more targeted towards people who are a bit farther along. Maybe they're starting their own business or they already have. And the grants are directly tied to our conference and to our showcases, actually. So we pull from the pools of all the applications to speak at our conference or to showcase their game in our direct or in our Steam sale. So our whole thing is about finding game developers who already do create incredible work. Just sort of the nature of our audience and the devs in our community, they may have some experience and background that being overlooked. So we're here to just sort of find and boost those developers, people who already do create incredible work and can actually attract an audience, but just need a little boost. So those grants are no strings. There's no milestone approvals and all that. that makes it compatible with, all the other options here. So, getting a grant from us is just a plus. You can still carry through with your publisher deal, with your crowdfunding campaign. Just to, I guess, to share some insight on what the differences between these kind of funding sources would be, and just sort of how our grant has impact on developers. It is that flexibility. So, for example, if you're pitching to publishers, you've sort of got to figure out which publishers you want to pitch to. If you got multiple deals, offers on the table, there's some due diligence and care towards what is and what isn't in your contract. Some publishers cover marketing, some publishers don't, and they're more focused on porting. So you have to really think about what you need, and if it's a fit with that publisher. A crowdfunding campaign, obviously a great source, but as you might be aware, that's its own entire project. So where we come in, we can just sort of we just sort of slide into whatever your plans already are as a developer, because we don't require anything, no strings, but that also means we don't provide very much either. So we don't do any production marketing, certainly not porting our QA or anything like that. We do sometimes introduce mentors, but specifically it's just a development funds grant only. So we transfer funds, we check in after 6 months, we check in again after a year just to see how things are going. We stay in touch, as alumni, and connect you with all the other alumni. Sometimes some people come back to share retrospectives or advice to newer grant recipients, either in the community or as like a post-mortem talk in the conference. And yeah, we try to connect and integrate it as much as possible. Inclusion in the conference, dev interviews, the direct, the Steam sale is all part of it. But generally, the devs that we are seeking out are devs that mainly are just missing funds, finishing funds, or what have you. So that's likely where we have the most likely impact as it relates to our other programs as well.
Thanks for going into it. Yeah, I know that the various programming that you guys all do, it's definitely one of those, you can't have the capacity to also do too much more past than already just providing finances and all. So it's really amazing to hear how essentially everyone's small bit of these programs and opportunities essentially lead into the overall growth for any developer to seek. I will also start wrapping up since we are at the 151 mark, to essentially ask all our panelists, I guess I'll mention who I'm asking at the time, but it'll be the same question. So apologies if it's a bit repetitive, but I'll come back to you, Brian. What are the specific benefits of developers seeking out, like, what, even if it's not at game devs of color, if you've seen, as you mentioned at the top, these other grants, what have been specific benefits that you've seen that developers have kind of like either taken with or found opportunities from it?
Yeah, from our perspective, running these grants and what we know of the other grants, the devs that gain the most out of this, and are also the most likely to get the grant in the first place, are devs that already have a strong, clear vision for what they want to make. I know there are prototype funds out there, but for most of these other grants, right, these are devs who don't need support for marketing, publishing, reporting, or if they do, they already have a budget and they have that sorted out. They just need the money for it, right? They sort of have their plan. They're treating it like a business, as a commercial product, as much as they are about artistic expression. And that's sort of the boost that these kind of grants give, because they don't give much else, just funds. And so, yeah, thinking about past grant recipients, even among the ones who have received the grant, those that are farther along in the project tend to have the better success rate. And it sounds great, yeah, free money, but of course the downside is we don't give anything else with it. You're sort of still on your own, and the grant fund amount is certainly not enough to fund your entire game. The largest grants we've given out are $25,000, which is a lot. But as you know, it's not enough to fund like a big team or anything like that. And finally, grants like ours and the ones that named often have a very specific call or criteria. So you can't exactly change your entire game mid-development. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to shoehorn in an application if it isn't already a strong fit.
Yeah, no, that's a really great reminder at the end there, especially with, you never know the timing of these things. And then I will ask you, Vicky, what are the specific benefits developers when they're seeking out getting publisher help versus self-publishing? What is the benefits of looking to funding with you and like publishers in general? I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. We do actually do the longer term funding. And I actually didn't talk about this, but I think everyone else has talked about this. There are strings attached to the topic of like what that means. But yeah, there's recoup and there are milestones. So we can cover the longer term funding. Obviously, the amounts are higher, but like I said, you should like I call it funding stacking, by the way. You should like go to multiple sources. And actually, while we're here, if you want to get console funding, do it before getting the publisher funding because they don't fund the publishers anymore, or they will. I do it before you do the publisher funding. But basically, so that is one site we can like support you up to launch, and then we also obviously the localization, the QA. We have porting, we have playtesting. Although if you're in New York City, there's tons of playtesting resources, which is really awesome, and marketing strategy. We also do, so we cover a lot of the additional services that you would have to do on your own, which I have done, and it is a lot of work, but it is doable, by the way, for self-publishing. But the other thing that's really cool that we do, I think like what publishers are really great for is for like the compounding of sales. It's partially because we have like a publisher will have a strong presence, mostly because they're like constantly like selling new games, so you can like go to the publisher to see like what their games are. And we have seen bumps in our already released games when we are launching a game. And something that we do is we just call it biz dev in general, which is like buyout deals with distributors, which is separate sales than the unit sales. And we typically do this post launch, and that's just like additional revenue on top of your unit sales. And then we do tons of bundle partnerships. We also participate in sales because from what I've seen is that most of like the unit sales come when at launch, and then when the games go on sale, because Steam, if you're on PC, Steam has a massive monopoly. And we also do what essentially I would call like custom partner sales that are not normally available to the public. So like the Steam summer sale is available to the public, but then like we run a publisher sale with Steam. So that's in another sale that we will get games in at the same time. And then we also like are able to partner with showcases and distributors to get additional marketing support because we already have that relationship. So yeah, with the publishing, it's mostly that compounding effect that comes with both, the funding, like that's hopefully just like smoothing the road to launch, and as well as a lot of like the relationship and services that we provide.
Yeah, no, that's amazing to take away. And also like really great pointers and reminders at the end there regarding also just like updates in regards to what people should be looking into. So really appreciate
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. It changes so much.
Yeah. Totally. And also like as you're mentioning, the kind of like using the essentially publisher, almost not to say fandom, but like you guys have people who are investing in the kind of, I guess, publishing taste, right? Like there's a level of marketing that just can't be because of funding an amount. It's also like your all's history of being in this field and releasing the titles that you have to do all that work. So totally hear you, and thank you for going into it. I'll kick it back to Jake. Is there any specific benefits you'd like to highlight when people are seeking out incubators or of the like that people should be aware of?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's many short and long term. I think like getting into a program like this or any incubator really helps with navigating much of the important critical decisions during early development of a project. So with the like structured close mentorship, having a timeline and eyes on and someone to really bounce ideas off of, that'll help with a lot of those challenging like business or team direction decisions. And while they're structuring the environment, it's also still pretty flexible and lower commitment funding and obligations while working with us. We won't commit it to the project, but we want to support whatever you want to do with it. And then while you're in an incubator program, like you also get a lot of validation from industry supporters internally, and then you get a good amount of visibility publicly through showcases, and then the word of mouth through that board and people who are already aware of programs like ours. And then long term, the benefits are a lot of the skills developed while you're in the incubator, the community, as I mentioned, and that combination of learning more about how to lead your team and then learning more about the landscapes and the people around you all contributes to future fundraising readiness. And we find that teams receiving this funding and structure also helps promote like professionalization and overall like self-assuredness and confidence for the team as a whole and leads to successful launches. And then, even for the long term, just more shared growth and sustained support from everyone involved. I think a tip would be like, regardless of what kind of program you're going to choose, study each incubator or accelerator program's focus on the kinds of games and what scales they operate at. Learn more about their staff, learn about alumni outcomes before you apply to them. Evaluate what about them you think is like repeatable and representative about the experience they have to offer. Incubators are really an experience to provide a lot of supplementary education alongside the production support. So learn a little bit about what you want to learn first. That could be like what your team needs help with, what you find you struggle with, or it could be really emphasizing your strengths, all while building that institutional insight about how you should launch a game and approach all of those other opportunities afterwards.
Yeah, thank you for giving us those insights. And finally, going back to Asia, what would you like to highlight in regards to those specific benefits and opportunities like yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So for crowdfunding, kind of an obvious one is you get creative control and ownership to kind of direct your vision for your project, how you kind of see fit. We don't really have any strings attached with like our only kind of strings attached, which I don't think is super applicable to video games creators, but essentially like if you plan to like run another campaign and you didn't fulfill your first one, you might run into some hurdles because we do just kind of want to have some policies there to protect our backers. But that's kind of like our only really strings attached as far as, you can kind of come to the platform and not really be beholden to anyone except for the people that are supporting your project, right? And that also kind of lends itself well to flexibility. And I will, for transparency purposes, it does help a lot for you to have a demo or have kind of some proof of concept before coming to the platform. But there are lots of campaigns that don't and succeed wildly. Not always, but that does happen. But you can kind of be at different points in the process. There are kind of, typical standard places where people find themselves whenever they come to Kickstarter, especially as far as like lending towards success. But there is a lot of flexibility and range there where you can kind of be coming from. And then there's also too, I spoke a little bit to this, but there's also the opportunity to, to build intimate relationships with your audience because you do have that direct through line to your audience. Where you can kind of just directly communicate with them. There's also product that is built into the Kickstarter platform as far as like, you have access to updates, access to, people who back on your project to comment on it, things like that to really kind of build camaraderie and momentum around your project. It just kind of, creates a really, really great environment. For example, a reward that is typically offered. And when I say reward as well, it's just what is offered. It's what we call what is offered to people who back your project. A typical reward for, video game creators on the platform is like access to a Discord server and like, or access to like being a mod in a Discord. So like having that, to be able to, offer to potential backers is a really great way to build community and have people, get really excited about your project and kind of have that direct influence there. And then lastly, Kickstarter has a really large built-in, audience. As I spoke again, like there's comics, there's publishing and stuff like that. Something that's pretty common amongst comics folks is that I think we ran some numbers on this last year, but comics and I think publishing, but comics specifically, had the highest crossover of folks who tend to back comics campaigns also tend to back games campaigns. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, games is a bread and butter category on the platform. So a lot of tabletop games backers are also interested in video games. So there's kind of that built-in audience there. And of course, there are also things that we offer on the back end. There's a lot of free marketing that we offer. Again, because it's free, it is competitive, but we have tons of newsletters and homepage features and stuff like that do connect with our audience and have wide audiences. And so for games that really fit that bill, and also to us as a games team do have a kind of initiative that we really, really want to see, video games continue to succeed on the platform, and hopefully maybe one day kind of maybe even supersede tabletop. We'll see. Because of that, we are trying to push, video games as much as possible and see them succeed as much as possible on the site. So there's also kind of that dedication amongst our team, still very dedicated to tabletop and other games as well, because there's all different types of games that launch on the platform. But we do have a particular emphasis on video games that we're also kind of, explaining the importance of that emphasis to the wider company as well. So those are just a run of benefits that can be had by, utilizing crowdfunding, specifically Kickstarter.
Well, thank you so much, you guys. I really want to highlight how valuable it is to have you all speak on this, and have it be available for developers to access as a video for us. I'll do some quick wrap-ups, but thank you guys as always for doing what you do for the development ecosystem of it all. And thank you again for speaking at ESD regarding this topic and being a colleague in this industry at large. I will do some quick wrap-ups, so feel free to stick around, but I would like to again mention that this will be a webinar series where we will be posting videos and also hosting these Zoom webinars for Q&A, case studies of all the different avenues that were mentioned on this call, on top of a eventual investor and VC funding speaker and panelists and success stories that have come out of looking into opportunities like these. And so when you come back to this, you should be able to find it via the ESD YouTube channel in a playlist of VODs for everyone to have access to. And thank you all for attending. In the next couple ones, we'll be able to, I believe the next one we will highlight will be the next case study webinar lineup will be regarding publishers. So we will meet with Vicky again and hear more from other developers and industry specialists alike regarding their topics. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and wishing you the best with making your games.